How many times have you heard someone, be it a casual fan of the kaiju genre or a self-professed film critic, say, "No one watches these movies for the human storylines, give me more monsters"? In fairness to these misinformed detractors, it is called the kaiju genre, so giving the behemoths top billing shouldn't be surprising. However, as one actually makes their way through the endless roster of kaiju eiga, the narrative surrounding the non-monster characters can take a fun, silly romp and turn it into a cinematic triumph, or at least a film that transcends the crudely applied labels typically slapped on these films. Despite being in its 8th decade with 36 films to its credit, the Godzilla franchise fares no better than any of the other rubber-suited movie melees, with even die-hard Daikaiju devotees only being able to call out a handful of characters and the talented actors that brought them to life. Without having to dig too deep, it becomes quite apparent that there are some performances that truly elevate these films and, in some cases, outshine the monsters themselves. These are the top 10 underrated performances in the Godzilla franchise. When one does think about the iconic portrayals that have graced the Godzilla series, the list is shamefully short. Akihiko Harada's tragic Dr. Serizawa, Akira Takara's heroic Ogata, Takashi Shimura's wise Dr. Yamane, the alluring Miss Namakawa, played beautifully by Kumi Mizuno, the majestic Shobajin brought to life by Emi and Yumi Ito, Megumi Odaka's telepathic Heisei-era favorite Miki Sagusa, Yumiko Shaku's portrayal of the courageous Lieutenant Akane Yashiro, and of course, Hiroki Hasegawa's Rondo Yoguchi from Shin Godzilla, which was nominated for a Japan Academy Film Prize. These brilliant actors all gave timeless performances and etched these characters forever into the collective conscience of kaiju fandom. But what about the other characters that were birthed by skilled actors that remain unheralded by the masses? From the Showa to the Reiwa era, there are dozens of performances that help bring credibility and narrative velocity to not just that individual film, but the entire series. From the savior to the sleaze, from the righteous to the wretched, these performances are long overdue for the proper recognition for which they deserve. It goes without saying that some will see this list and consider it a solid roster of character portrayals, and others will vehemently disagree with it. Both of these responses, and everything in between, should be embraced and discussed because the goal is simply to start the dialogue. Once the conversations begin, there is no doubt that just due will be given to the countless talented actors that helped bring forth narrative resonance around their iconic kaiju co-stars. Number 10. Yoshio Suchia as Yasuaki Shindo, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, 1991. When selecting someone to bring to life a former military commander turned business tycoon that was once saved by a dinosaur in a film bogged down by a convoluted time travel plot, how could one not think of the incomparable Yoshio Suchia? Luckily for 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, they did think of the former human vapor and Mysterian leader to fill the critical role of Yasuaki Shindo. Despite his other memorable performances in film, from Rikichi in Seven Samurai to his career-defining portrayal of the controller of Planet X in Invasion of Astro Monster, it likely was his supporting performance as Shindo that shined the brightest, both stealing scenes from the lead cast and giving fans one of the most iconic moments of the Heisei era. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah has a complicated legacy. From the seemingly manufactured outcry of anti-Americanism to the Dorats to Major Spielberg, many Godzilla fans find this movie to be one of the more polarizing in the series. The decision to define the origins of Godzilla down to a specific dinosaur was not to everyone's liking. Linking this prehistoric beast to a stranded and doomed Japanese garrison during World War II in a manner that would come off as profound was a tall order for director Kazuki Omori. After all, the entire story, the good, the bad, and the extremely bloated, all hinged on this very plot point. It would take an actor that could not only deliver a believable performance as a cornered military leader facing assured annihilation, but an enigmatic dinosaur-loving billionaire forever in debt to this life-saving theropod. Yoshio Suchia wasn't the right choice. He was the only choice. As Shindo, Suchiya's expressions always gave the impression that he carried a secret. As a viewer, the challenge was understanding if his intentions were noble or malevolent. In his early interactions with Serizawa, played by Kosuke Toyohara, the aged industrialist dismisses the young writer, denying the existence of the Lagos Island dinosaur. Suchiya, known for his hatred of predictable stock rolls, plays this initial offering surprisingly by the book. Or so we think. He has to be an evil, greed-fueled businessman that's hiding something that will mean disaster for humankind, right? Nope. Suchia holds our hands as we walk down this path, but drops breadcrumbs of doubt that add texture to his character. This is not done simply by the writing, but how the masterful actor carries himself as Shinto. It's in the cadence of his delivery, the intriguing darting of an eye, and the well-placed dramatic pause. Of course, this all culminates in the scene. Opinions of the movie as a whole aside, none can deny the emotional weight that the stare-down between Shindo and Godzilla carries. The viewer is absorbed into Shindo's glare, and for a moment, they are one with the character as he faces the final moments of life. It's this instance, more than any scene as the controller of Planet X or the countless characters portrayed by the talented Yoshio Suchia, that should be considered a pinnacle of kaiju film performances. Number 9. Manu Chiaki as Koji Kobayashi, Godzilla Raids Again, 1955. For many, when it comes to characters making the ultimate sacrifice, that conversation begins and ends with Gojira's Dr. Serizawa. Akihiko Harada's work as the eye-patch scientist was stupendous and deserves its place in the pantheon of great film performances. However, though it may have indeed been the first, it was not the only. In fact, a year later, a character went through a similar journey, dealing with unreciprocated love and the burden of being the only person able to stop a rampaging Godzilla. That character was Koji Kobayashi, a fish scouting pilot played by the legendary Japanese actor Manu Chiaki in 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. But why is this story overlooked in favor of Dr. Serizawa's? Unfortunately for Godzilla Raids Again, it needed more than Manu Chiaki's stellar performance to overcome issues, both perceived and real. The prevailing opinion around the film has always been that of a haphazardly rushed production meant to capitalize on the success of Godzilla's debut a year prior. Between that, the lack of Ishiro Honda's direction, bad dinosaur science, and a departure, though not completely abandonment, from the nuclear commentary, Godzilla Raids Again remains an afterthought when discussing the upper echelon of kaiju eiga. It's doomed by its proximity to the original and the natural inclination to compare the two. They are the first two, after all, and the only two in black and white. And this dampening of the film's legacy has, in turn, removed many of its individual performances from memory as well. The most egregious of these omissions is that of Koji Kobayashi. There is no denying that Manu Chiaki was a giant in Japanese cinematic history. His work with the incomparable Akira Kurosawa included roles in Seven Samurai, Rashomon, I Live in Fear, and The Hidden Fortress. In fact, Chiaki is often referenced as one of Kurosawa's favorite actors, having appeared in 11 of the famed director's works. Later in life, working for Toei, he won the Japan Academy Prize for Best Actor in 1985's critically acclaimed Grey Sunset. And his legacy within the Godzilla series extends beyond this single appearance. His father-in-law, Takamaru Sasaki, appeared in Invasion of Astro Monster, and his son, the talented Katsuhiko Sasaki, was a mainstay in the series for multiple decades, starring in Godzilla vs. Megalon, Terror of Mechagodzilla, and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Chiaki was adept at bringing an element of humor without sacrificing dramatic substance, seen in his beloved portrayal of Heihachi in Seven Samurai. The next year, elements of Heihachi were prevalent in the brave Koji Kobayashi. The amount of screen time for Koji Kobayashi is staggeringly small for one of the main supporting cast members. Hiroshi Koizumi is undoubtedly the lead and, in typical Koizumi fashion, delivers a respectable performance, though not his best work in the kaiju genre, as Shoichi Tsukioka. Kobayashi and Tsukioka are believable as friends and have an authentic chemistry on screen. But it's Kobayashi's relationship with Tsukioka's girlfriend, Hidame Yamaji, played by Setsuko Wakayama, that really brings Kobayashi's character to the forefront. It's playful and silly, but the entire time, you feel there is something bubbling under the surface with Kobayashi, using humor to take his mind off his real feelings. This is never explored in much detail outside of Kobayashi's resistance to showing the photo of his new girlfriend. We are left with only cryptic clues of his true feelings, expertly inferred by the subtleties of a skilled actor. After Godzilla and Anguirus destroy Osaka and the main characters meet up again in Hokkaido, the character of Koji Kobayashi really blossoms. Dubbed Mr. Groom for his constant search for a wife, a search that we uncovered likely never happened, Kobayashi is the life of the party, well, parties. He is known and admired by everyone in Hokkaido, from company executives to the fishermen to the restaurant staff. The people around him love him, so the viewer starts to love him even more. Kobayashi's signature scene is with the radiant Hideme. He asks her about what to buy women as gifts, and for the first time, the viewers are somewhat let in on Kobayashi's secret. From this moment through the final act, where he ultimately sacrifices himself in efforts to stop Godzilla, Manu Chiaki leverages the charm that he brings to the character to establish an emotional connection with the viewer. It could be argued that he is the only one successful in this endeavor. It's this charisma, more so than any actual bit of story, that adds a sense of poignancy to the final moments of Kobayashi. In a film that is competent yet not spectacular, plagued by a litany of issues both warranted and unfairly levied against it, Minoru Chiaki's Koji Kobayashi gives us a character to relate to, laugh at, root for, pity, and cry for. And that is a feat worth remembering as one of the most underrated performances in the Godzilla series. Number 7. Tomoko Ai as Katsura Mifune, Terror of Mechagodzilla, 1975. For many, a strong acting performance is defined as one that elicits a calculated emotion from the audience. Many actors possess extreme technical skill, where a simple facial flicker, the darting of an eye, or a subtle voice inflection can bring a viewer to tears or have them rolling on the floor in laughter or throwing kitchen appliances at the television. However, this is not the only way to achieve this aim. Some actors have an innate charisma, a magnetic on-screen presence that can grab the viewer and make them root for or against them during their character's journey. This intangible charm is extremely powerful and persuasive, and it's what the incomparable Ai has in abundance. And it's also what she brings to the character of Katsura, the cyborg daughter of Dr. Mifune in 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla. Portraying a half-human, half-robot without leaning too much in one direction is challenging, and navigating that tightrope was the single greatest achievement of Ai's work. This delicate balance was best seen in the predicaments that called for her humanity to shine, namely her doomed and extremely accelerated romance with the goofy and somewhat bumbling Ichinose, played expertly by skilled hand Katsuhiko Sasaki. As her mutual respect and admiration for Ichinose grew, Katsuo was only seen to the viewer as a human struggling with her identity as either flesh and blood or metal and gears. And those watching are never taken out of the scene with any thoughts of, how does this guy not know this is a robot? Conversely, when Katsura is controlling Mechagodzilla as he rampages through the city, Ai leads with calculated, cold expressions and stiff posture, but the internal struggle is still vividly captured in her facials and movements. The ability to prioritize her human self or robot persona without a total abandonment of the other is nothing short of acting transcendence, and the natural charismatic powers of Ai are never lost in her interpretation of this character. It's a winning combination that overshadows any perceived technical flaws in the performance and makes Katsura the most pivotal component of Terror of Mechagodzilla. Number 7. Tomonori Yazaki as Ichiro Miki, All Monsters Attack, 1969. Though the merits of All Monsters Attack, aka Godzilla's Revenge, actually being a Godzilla film is questionable at best, its wide acceptance among fans as a member of the franchise allows its inclusion to the list. And it has Kenji Sahara in it, so it has to be a Godzilla film, right? There's no doubt that All Monsters Attack is, at best, misunderstood, and at worst, considered to be the lowest rung on the Godzilla movie ladder. But it could be argued that it's the only film where the main star is not our favorite radioactive kaiju. That isn't to say that other non-kaiju characters haven't been important, but they didn't bump Godzilla from top billing. However, Tomonori Yazaki's Ichiro is the clear-cut leading boy with Godzilla in a supporting role. In fact, there is also a strong case that Godzilla's role is also less prominent than his controversial son, Minya. The aim here is not to try and defend the film, which happened to be one of director Ishiro Honda's favorites, but rather to highlight the performance of Tomonori Yazaki as the young protagonist. Like the film, Yazaki's role often bears the burden of misplaced expectations. The intent of the film was to discuss the plight of the latchkey kid in the increasingly overly industrialized Japan of the 1960s. It was not about Godzilla besting a rival beast or trampling buildings. Similarly, the role of Ichiro was to portray that of a lonely but imaginative child that counteracts the unfortunate circumstances of his situation by daydreaming about monsters. It was not to discover a way to stop an alien invasion by inventing a special rocket in 24 hours. Yazaki is extremely successful in his goal. Children can see themselves in him, how he responds to bullies, how he misses his parents, and how he has to grow up faster because of his forced independence. These traits are all delivered by Yazaki with an enthusiastic authenticity. A Japanese 6-year-old watching Yazaki's performance in 1969 could easily relate to this, whereas a 40-year-old adult in 2022 might only focus on the silliness of the dialogue and his interactions with an admittedly goofy talking Minya. Once again, real kids in any year talk in what amounts to silly dialogue. Real kids that dream of hanging out on islands with rubber-suited monsters from their favorite films would likely interact with them the same as Ichiro. And Miyazaki should get all the credit for handling these scenes with the confidence of a veteran actor. He always felt like a kid, a real kid, not a kid reading lines or playing actor, and he exuded a magnetic enchantment that would engulf young viewers and draw them into a personally applicable story. Miyazaki, through the character of Ichiro, walked down a path that no other actor has, or likely will. He had Godzilla as a supporting actor in his movie. Number 6. Rudo Isaki as Commander Taizo Tachibana, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, 2001. The Godzilla catalog has no shortage of military roles, although unfortunately many exist to simply fill a war room or push along plot points. Only a few examples have approached the realm of being memorable, so it's somewhat surprising that one such instance is from a man known more for his musical career than his prowess as an actor, Rudo Isaki. However, Isaki in 2001's Shusuke Kaneko directed Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, delivers a performance that's as thoughtful as it is strong, and sublimely showcases the complexity that defines Commander Taizo Tachibana. Though his daughter Yuri, played by former gravure model Chihara Niyama, is designed to be the lead, her character's journey is one-dimensional. It's Taizo that offers the audience a multi-tiered character progression, navigating his internal conflict as a single father to a free-spirited daughter that hasn't quite lived up to her perceived potential, and the quite literal external battle with the rampaging Godzilla. But even the conflict with the sinister kaiju has hidden depths, as Taizo's personal history was affected by the original Godzilla attack in 1954. Undoubtedly, Kaneko and the writing team deserve much of the credit for the character, but it's Izaki that brings this layered persona to life in a credible manner. When Yuri returns home intoxicated, Izaki's tone is a perfect blend of a disappointed father and a stern military man. The viewer is never left questioning how much he cares for his daughter, nor do you forget that this character is a high-ranking officer. Possessing the demeanor and presence necessary to fulfill the military leader role with authenticity and transition to a father struggling to guide his daughter's professional and personal growth with that same level of believability is no small task. And Izaki's ability to do so is a big reason that this portrayal separates itself from other similar characters in the series. In addition, his performance is pivotal to the film, as it keeps the audience engaged with both the Godzilla narrative and Yuri's arc. In fact, it takes Yuri from being simply an investigative journalist with reckless ambition, a character that may not appeal to many, to a daughter that has struggled to please her successful and duty-bound father. Taizo humanizes Yuri, and if his portrayal is not delivered beautifully, Yuri's character is less interesting, and the quality of the film suffers immensely. Fortuitously, the skilled work of Rudo Isaki gives us a commander that doesn't relish conflict, a loving father that denies his daughter's professional shortcuts, the savior of Japan that isn't so overwhelmed by the moment that he forgets about his potential contamination and halts his own daughter from embracing him, and ultimately, a performance that outshines all others in the Millennium series. Number 5. Akiko Wakabayashi as Princess Salno, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, 1964. Before she was a Bond girl and You Only Live Twice, Akiko was appearing in a handful of Toho tokusatsu films, notably King Kong vs. Godzilla, The Lost World of Sinbad, and Dogora the Space Monster. Her last Kaiju Eiga performance was her most memorable, Princess Mas Dulina Salno in 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. When one is asked to play a princess of a fictional country that is possessed by a disembodied descendant of the ancient Venusians, it can be a tall task to keep the performance in the realm of believability. The risk of the part being turned into unintentional comedy and the impetus of eye rolls and painful groans is quite high. When those stakes are coupled with the part being the most pivotal in the film's story, they become even higher. Luckily for Toho, the story, and kaiju film lovers, Wakabayashi's performance balances the alien with the humanity. She does this in a way that is both profound and authentic, and allows the viewer to accept the outlandish premise without considering the film a parody. In fact, just as Mothra vs. Godzilla introduced the series to concepts of fantasy earlier in the year, this role is the first alien character, even though it's through a human proxy. Had Wakabayashi's portrayal not been as successful, that could have tarnished the next wave of cosmic invaders and left them as mere caricatures of science fiction at that time. The credibility bestowed upon the Planet X aliens or the Kilax or the Simians by the audience, at least to some degree, owes a debt of gratitude to the Venusian prophet. Paramount to the success of Princess Salno are her interactions with Detective Shindo, played by Yosuke Natsuki, and his sister Naoko, played by Yuriko Hoshi. In her Venusian state, Wakabayashi remains aloof, and even amid verbal insults from crowds of onlookers and from the physical attacks of Chief Assassin Malnus, played by Hiroshi Ito, and his goons, her emotionless facial expressions and stiffened movements create the impression of a living mannequin. But those decisions are what allow the audience to believe that she is not only being controlled by the alien entity, but that entity is so evolved and advanced as to not acquiesce to the fear of these human situations. It's this elegant stoicism that defines this character throughout much of the film. The entire time that Wakabayashi Salno is prophesizing or highlighting the alienness of her character, she gives the audience just enough humanity, an indescribable softness that elicits pity and care, so that when she does transition back to her human state, one is left satisfied. This unique trait also allows the inference to the future romantic relationship between Detective Shindo and the princess to be plausible, despite the lack of real interaction between the officer and the non-Venusian version of Salno. Though she may be best remembered as a lethal ninja who saved James Bond, Akiko Wakabayashi's Princess Salno has proven to be even more critical to the Godzilla franchise. As the debut alien in a series that would be known for its roster of would-be interplanetary plunderers, Wakabayashi's dignified detachment that she imbued into Princess Salno laid a firm foundation for those that would come after her. Number 4. Yoshifumi Tajima as Kumayama, Mothra vs. Godzilla, 1964. Yoshifumi Tajima was a Toho regular throughout the Showa era, appearing in numerous kaiju films from 1956 until his final role in 1984's Return of Godzilla. He was often cast as military personnel, like in Varan and Mothra and Frankenstein Conquers the World, a detective, like the H-Man or All Monsters Attack or Bullet Train, or a journalist, Rodan, The Bad Sleep Well. Adjacent to news reporting, Tajima's work as Seki, the news desk editor in Ultra Q, is likely what he is most remembered within the greater tokusatsu community. Aside from these typical assignments, Tajima also excelled in villainous roles such as the diamond thief Tada in Dogora, and one of Doctor Who's henchmen in King Kong Escapes. And it was this manner of casting that created one of the most memorable characters of the Showa era. For all intents and purposes, Mothra vs. Godzilla is a serious film. Not Godzilla 1954 serious, but it is in no way meant to lead with the silliness. A dose of subtle levity was desperately needed opposite the quasi-stoic performances by the two leads, Akira Takara and Hiroshi Koizumi. Enter Mr. Kumayama, the president of Happy Enterprises, co-founder of Shinozora Happy Center, a great entrepreneur, and all-around sleazy dude. Kumayama is a greedy and conniving opportunist, exploiting poor fishermen, trying to steal the Shoba gene, and just being genuinely shady. But from the moment he appears, his arrogance and sadistic charm begin to steal scenes. The character on the surface is straight out of Central Casting, an evil businessman that wants to take advantage of a newly discovered marvel, in this case Mothra's egg. However, Kumayama avoids this fate for two major reasons. First and foremost, the character is given small, very small, but impactful moments that force the viewer to not think of him as pure greed and evil. For instance, he gave a fair and logic-based price to the fishermen that satisfied both parties. From a kaiju movie accounting standpoint, the math checks out. That's just how business is done. Not unethical business, just business. It's not Kumayama's fault that he, or rather Torahata, played by Toho regular Kenji Sahara, had bigger ideas for this resource. In fact, it was the wealthy Torahata that was doing the real scamming, and his manipulative chicanery extended to Kumayama as well. This isn't to say that Kumayama is a sympathetic character, he most certainly is not, but one does start to relate to his feelings of being wronged. Secondly, the acting prowess of Tajima has to be credited for making Kumayama more than a simple stock character. He walks the fine line, and very nimbly at that, between being an unbelievable caricature used solely for comic relief and a devious yet likable villain with exaggerated traits of a money-grubbing industrialist. This is best represented by the fact that at no point does one root for Kumayama to best our heroic trio or the Shoba gene, but when faced with the truth about his crooked financier, one can't help but root for Kumayama as he unloads a fury of fists down upon Torahata. It's not a full redemption arc, but it's acceptable for at least a single scene to cheer for this degenerative scoundrel that manages to bring smiles to viewers' faces. In Kumayama's final scene, Tajima's facial expressions as he scrambles to steal Torahata's money as payback are priceless. Equal parts dread as Godzilla approaches, fatigue from its fight with Torahata, and eye-bulging glee from collecting those piles of cash. Moments later, Kumayama is killed, symbolically shot from behind by Torahata, thus ending our journey with the great entrepreneur. Don't worry, Torihata gets his comeuppance as he is crushed by falling debris in his hotel, courtesy of a rampaging Godzilla. There's always a bigger bad guy. Mothra vs. Godzilla is largely considered one of the best representations of the golden era of Toho. It introduced a fantasy element into the series, marked the end of Godzilla being a definitive villain in the Showa era, and assembled one of the best casts of Toho regulars up to that point in time. It is a film that has numerous strengths, and one of those that should be remembered as much as Godzilla's epic entrance or Akira Ifukube's rousing score is the performance of Yoshifumi Tajima as Mr. Kumayama. Number 3. Akira Takara as Yoshimura, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, 1966. If one has a rightful claim as the human face of the Godzilla series, it's Akira Takara. From the onset of the franchise, his portrayal as Hideto Ogata in Gojira until his role of UN Secretary General Daigo 50 years later in Godzilla Final Wars, Takara has given kaiju fans amazing performances. Each character possesses that indescribable Takara it factor, an unrivaled blend of sophistication, strength, and charisma. Despite Ogata being his most noteworthy role, it may not be his best. Somewhere nestled in Takara's Godzilla filmography, behind his triumphant debut in 1954, and even his roles as reporter Ichiro Sakai in Mothra vs. Godzilla and astronaut Kazuo Fuji in Invasion of Astro Monster, is the part of safecracker Yoshimura in 1966's Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, also known as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. It could be that fans are predisposed to Takara playing honorable characters and involuntarily root for him to succeed, but the subtle skill at which he paints Yoshimura as an almost reluctant thief is beyond brilliant. As a viewer, the moment Yoshimura shows up on the stolen yacht, you begin your very own redemption story arc in your personal headcanon. In his early interactions with Ryota, Nita, and Ichino, it's clear that Yoshimura lacks the violent tendencies of a hardened criminal. From his fake gun to his decision to allow Nita and Ichino to stay the night on the yacht, Takara beautifully elicits a feeling of pity for a man who had just robbed a bank without any major plot developments to support it, just the acting prowess of a skilled professional. As the film progresses, Yoshimura becomes more invested in the goals of the group's participants. Ryota finding his missing brother, the college students getting back home, Daio reuniting with her fellow infant islanders, and the destruction of the sinister faction, the Red Bamboo. Yoshimura uses his cunning and special thieving skills and a pretty impressive skeleton key to get the group out of numerous jams, furthering his status as the leader of this motley crew. Once again, Takara should be commended for not accelerating the redemption of Yoshimura too quickly. The viewer can still see, partially through his competence as a burglar and partially through his outward expressions of inward conflict, that Yoshimura has more runway left to complete his moral turnaround. In a fitting line of dialogue, when following Yata in the Red Bamboo encampment, despite disagreeing with the plan, Yoshimura quips, "Might as well help him. I'm a sucker for a hero." Of course, it's Yoshimura himself who becomes the main hero of the story. As Mothra carries him, Ryota, Yata, Nita, Ichino, and the infant island natives away from the exploding base, it's clear that Yoshimura will return to Japan as a new man and turn over a new leaf. Thus, the redemption of Yoshimura is complete. Number 2. Yosuke Natsuki as Dr. Hayashida, Return of Godzilla, 1984. The Showa era of Godzilla has its fair share of memorable scientists. In fact, that time period of the Godzilla series is bookended with two such characters, both played by the legendary Akihiko Harada, Dr. Serizawa in Gojira and Dr. Mifune in Terror of Mechagodzilla. After 9 years of being on ice, Godzilla returned in 1984 and was set to pick back up again with Harada portraying yet another scientist in a pivotal role. Unfortunately, Harada fell ill and was unable to be part of what was to be 1984's Return of Godzilla, and that left a giant void that needed someone of Harada's eminence and influence to add credibility to the film. After all, when you are reigniting one of the most recognizable franchises in film history after an extended layoff, and ignoring the loose continuity of the previous 14 films that followed the original, you can't have someone fresh out of acting school playing the role of Dr. Makoto Hayashida, founder of the Hayashida Biophysics Institute. Enter 1961 Elan d'Or Newcomer of the Year award winner, Yosuke Natsuki. Natsuki was no stranger to Toho and Godzilla. His role as Detective Shindo in 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster could have easily been included on this list. As Shindo, Natsuki was believable as a lawman that bravely defended Princess Salno from her assassins. He was stoic without being stiff, and his brotherly interactions with his sister added the necessary relatability to the character. That same approach helped produce one of the best performances in the Godzilla continuum. Hayashida was a cutting-edge scientist of supreme intellect, but Natsuki added an alpha quality to him that separated him away from the caricatures of the socially awkward egghead or the volatile mad scientist. Natsuki's work gave the impression that Hayashida was just as comfortable jumping out of buildings as he was developing the technology to lure a devastating kaiju to a volcano. And since he does both in The Return of Godzilla, an authentic portrayal of that duality was paramount to the role, and the entire film. Fortunately, Natsuki delivered, and gave the audience a grounded and trusted touchstone that helped soften some of the more offbeat plot elements. But the impressive nature of the character goes beyond his action movie heroism and his ability to produce the solution to dispose of Godzilla. Hayashida's philosophical approach to what Godzilla is, an indestructible reminder from nature of what man is capable of doing, makes the character feel like he represents a higher level of enlightenment, especially since the backstory could have easily taken the path of the revenge-fueled son. Natsuki was uniquely suited to bring the multifaceted personality to the screen because he comes across as the genuine article, an almost superhuman hybrid of scientist, hero, and philosopher. On top of this, how could one not love his interactions with the great Hiroshi Koizumi in a moment of profoundly effective fan service? Although he may not serve as the lead role in the film, Yosuke Natsuki's Dr. Hayashida serves as the backbone of the film, a strong foundation that doesn't allow the story to crumble despite some occasional flaws. Although Harada probably would have done an outstanding job in this role, it's hard to see any other actor pulling off Dr. Hayashida in a manner that was achieved by the iconic Yosuke Natsuki. And the number one most underrated performance in the Godzilla series, Hiroshi Ishikawa as Gengo Kataka in Godzilla vs. Gigan, 1972. When trying to stop a rampaging kaiju or halt an alien invasion, it helps to be a soldier or a scientist or an astronaut or even a mutant. Even investigative reporters with connections to those sorts can be pretty useful. Throughout the Godzilla series, there are plenty of these heroes that can save the day and in most cases the Earth. One profession that you don't see though is manga artist. However, in 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan, such a person does indeed save the day. That person is Gengo Kataka, played by Hiroshi Ishikawa. He gave a Silly Wave, Shukra, and Mamagon, and possibly the most underrated performance in the entire cinematic history of Godzilla. Unlike some of the other actors on this list, such as Akira Takara or Manu Chiaki, Hiroshi Ishikawa's career was relatively short with no major credits after the mid-70s. However, in 1972, he was able to star in not one but two Toho films. In addition to his work in Seifuku no Mune no Kokuniwa, Ishikawa was able to bring the character of Gengo Kataka to life in Godzilla vs. Gigan. The film, when viewed from the macro level, delicately dances to and from various tonal shifts. It's a kids' film with camera lens covering blood splatters, a movie with talking monsters, space cockroaches, and action tapes, but where a teenager and his teacher die during a rock climbing trip. The character of Gengo is the perfect protagonist to straddle these disparate approaches. He consistently confronts the scheming director Kubota, but faints dramatically at a corn on the cob. He is the struggling illustrator with no special combat ability, save for his karate master girlfriend, yet is comfortable in risking his life against the alien invaders. He is intuitive enough to suspect evildoing from how the aliens talk about peace, and to quickly pick up the action tape dropped by the fleeing Machiko Shima, played by Tomoko Umeda, but was too dense to assume that the out-of-nowhere gift of cigarettes from the director could be more than just a pack of smokes. As the chairman states rather eloquently, he is foolish yet cunning. But even if a character is written well, it takes a skilled hand to bring that to life, and that is certainly what Ishikawa does here. For one of the only times, and possibly the best, a viewer can see themselves as the lead hero. Gengo may be more of an everyman, but he certainly isn't the typical protagonist. It's not just that the viewer can relate to him because his profession is less action-oriented, it's because the actions that he takes during the character's path are realistic for a large majority of people. There would be mistakes. There would be bumbling around and bad attempts to cover it up. You'd most likely upset a loved one, and though it's difficult to admit, you'd probably faint from the corn on the cob too. Ishikawa's facial expressions, half-witty comebacks, and awkward mannerisms are powerful weapons wielded by a master at his craft. He brought humor and accessibility to a role that, until then, had been designated for serious and disciplined alphas or ambitious hero types. When you watch Godzilla vs. Gigan, you root for him to succeed as much as you do for Godzilla and Anguirus. That alone is enough to warrant recognition as one of the franchise's top leads. And there you have it, our top 10 most underrated performances in the Godzilla franchise. Who were your top 10? Did you agree with this list? Who did we forget? Let us know in the comments, and then check out YHS on Monster Island on the YHS on Monster Island YouTube channel or any podcast platform that you may like.